just get on with the slides. So fundamentally, what we've learned about research translation and the failure of research translation, and it's no different to the failure in commercialization, which is no different to the failure in entrepreneurship, in startups. 95% of startups fail. 80% of products from big multinational companies fail. So in reality, most businesses, ideas, innovations, research projects, they fail, and there's a full stop there. But they don't fail because the idea doesn't work, because the technology doesn't do what it's supposed to do. The technology is very rarely a cause for failure. They fail because of an inability to get people to use the idea, to engage with the idea, or really to get anyone to care that idea. And so in some senses, again, what we've learned is that poor research translation comes from the inability to deliver a unique solution to an unresolved problem faster, cheaper, or better than status quo. So, and in some senses, it might not even be that unique a solution. And this is part of the challenge that we've identified, is that we spend so much time in R&D coming up with innovative solutions, but we actually haven't spent anywhere near enough time trying to work out, well, what is the unresolved problem? And when we do think about the problem, we entirely leave that up to the researchers, and they come up with a technical problem. Okay, we need a new chemical and some new chemistry to be able to deal with these pests and diseases. We need a new sensor to be able to detect pests in the field, in a real-time digital sensing sense. And so we're focused, most of our research, and you guys have told us this, most of the research is focused on of creating really fundamentally innovative solutions to really fundamental technical problems, but no one's actually worked out really in any deep sense of what are the human factors in terms of needing to solve the human problems to be able to implement the solution. And then the last part here is status quo. Now, in reality, status quo is the enemy. And I mean, I think one thing that's interesting about what we've learned over this COVID thing, and it's just writ large on the front page of every newspaper, almost every day, is we humans, we don't like to take risks. You see what our friends over there in WA, they're very happy to build a big wall and say, look, we don't want anyone over here. And Mark McGowan got elected, almost destroyed the entire opposition party by just saying, look, we don't give a stuff about the rest of you. We're going to look after ourselves. Because and look, Queensland's done the same. Victoria's learned their lessons. They're doing the same. And what that says about us as a people, I think, is really interesting, is that humans don't like to take risks. And so, we like to re-elect governments that protect us, that save us from any risk. And I think we've got to understand that farmers are even more risk averse than that. And we, with new technologies and new innovations, we're asking them to take a risk. And the vast majority of them don't want to take that risk because they can't afford to. It's not some sort of luxurious thing. They can't afford to take a risk because they're working on very small margins. They've got so many other variables that they have to accept as risk every day, whether it's raining, whether it's storming, whether it's flooding, whether it's, whether there's drought, whether there's fire. Every day they get up, they're having to deal with risk. So the last thing that they want to do is to take another risk. And so what we've really got to understand is, how do we mitigate that risk? And there's some doubt about whether Einstein said this, but it's very elegant to think that he might have. That if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes on the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. And this is really fundamentally, I guess, the principle behind design thinking, which is we need to understand the problem first before we think about the solution. And again, if we talk to researchers, they're very comfortable with this. They'll do a 3-month lit review to try and understand the problem and not talk to a single human in the journey. And that, I think, therein lies some of the problems. So ultimately, what we want to do in the process we've designed is actually trying to merge a whole heap of different sort of streams of thought around how do we come up with innovative solutions that solve problems that are unresolved and that are really compelling problems that people are desperately wanting to solve. So the focus, I guess, of today is, and we're going to be asking you the question all day, make sure you're solving the right problem. That's what we heard from you guys, is when we asked you the question, why do you think we don't succeed? When we don't succeed, when we fail, why is it? And so many times we heard from you guys, I think we solved the wrong problem. Because, and again, we heard from you guys, and we heard from people inside and outside the field and the industry, is that the problem is rarely technical, it's almost always human. And so we're spending all of our time creating technical solutions to technical problems. What we probably need to start doing is actually spending more time thinking about human problems and human solutions. And so what's really interesting is is, we've spent a lot of time on this technology readiness level. We have a really good understanding of this system now, where we go from, and university academics typically work in that TRL1 to TRL3 space. And I've spent the best part of 15 years working with university academics. Once it gets to TRL3, that's when the publication comes. If it's really good science, it's where you get an A star, maybe a Nature publication or a Lancet or something. The interest sort of wanes after our TRL3. Maybe Cyro might go to TRL4 or 5, occasionally 5, not often. Maybe a DPI might go to TRL4 or 5, doing less of the TRL1. But in reality, industry, when they want to take something on, they want TRL, preferably 9. They want it ready to launch. If not 9, then 8. And so we've got this big TRL gap. And there's really, part of the thing we've identified is that there's really a gap in the whole R&D ecosystem. This is not just an ag thing, this is an R&D thing, is that there's really no one that has responsibility for going from TRL 3 or 4 up to 8 or 9. And in some senses, even when we do try and do that, we often fail because we haven't actually understood the human behavior issues that we've got to solve. And so on the left-hand side, you see the investment readiness level, which was developed by Steve Blank, the founder and the father of the lean startup movement. And he said, look, rather than just thinking about the technology developing and getting it as a working prototype, ready to launch, what if we make sure that we start at the ground level of thinking, well, what's the problem we're solving? And will the idea of the solution, not even the actual solution, before we've even created the solution, will this idea of this solution solve that problem? And finding ways to do that. And that's sort of the principle that we've built into this. And so this sort of fits really neatly into some of the theory on innovation. And Tim Castell and John Steen, UQ academics, wrote a paper in 2015, which was basically the concept of this is that an idea does not equal an innovation. An idea only becomes an innovation when you do two things. The first part is you've got to be able to make that idea real. Perpetual motion is a great idea, but no one's been able to make it real. And so that's the first part. And in reality, the TRL system answers that question. How real is it? How scalable is it? How scalable is it? But in some senses, and researchers get very upset when I say this, that's the easy part, because that's just a process of time and money. If you've got enough time and enough money, you'll work out how to make it real. The hard part is, how does that idea unlock value? And it's not until we can work that piece out that we can actually end up with an innovation. So if you can't make it real, you can't unlock value either. But fundamentally, we've spent so much time trying to make profoundly innovative technologies, making them real, but we haven't spent enough time thinking about how do we unlock value with those ideas. And that's what the investment readiness level is. And that's what effectively the lean startup methodology is, which we're going to be basing a lot of what we're doing on. So, in some senses, if we just go from idea to invention, we might end up with an innovative solution. And then we end up with all of these, and you can replace your own project in there of fundamentally great innovations that don't work. Status fries was a low-fat French fry that Burger King in the US launched in 2014 or 2013. It was hailed as this is going to, really provide a healthy option for people who want to go to Hungry Jack's. And ultimately, what I think they realized is that people who walk through the front door of Hungry Jack's don't give a rip about health. That's particularly relevant in 2014. Maybe that's probably changed a little bit in the last 3 or 4 years, but this failed within 12 months because and they spent a lot of time and money sort of developing the technology. They had the chips were less absorbent of fat. They had a whole system of making these healthy, but it didn't solve the right problem. They couldn't unlock value. But when we get it right, when we get an innovative solution and combine that with an unresolved problem, you get what these guys in Power did. I love this particular Power story because it happened almost at the same time as it launched almost at a similar time to Beyond Meat and Impossible Burgers. Because what Beyond Meat and Impossible did, they spent $500 million in 5 years developing this burger that tasted a little bit like meat. And I think Beyond made $50 million sales in their first year. These guys, within a very short period of time, worked out, well, there's all these people out there in the world that really want to eat pizza, but they're either gluten-free and the gluten-free pizza bases taste like crap, or they want a low-carb pizza. Now I did low carb. I lost a lot of weight with low carb. The only way I could have pizza is just scrape the topping off because there is no low carb pizza. And so these guys launched this product. $45 million worth of sales in the first year. Yeah, and let me tell you, it's not profoundly innovative. It's just they've just actually solved an unresolved problem with a unique solution. And I guess that's part of the nature of how do we get innovation, is we've got to do both of these two things, not just the one. And that's, I think, part of the problem that we have. And in some senses, let me introduce you to ethnography. Now, some of you would know ethnography. If you don't all know ethnography, that's part of the problem, because ethnography is really this process of observing complexity and nuance in human behavior. And what I think we've learned about commercialization, about even really about fundamentally about behavior modifications, and we learned this from psychology. The psychologists have known this all along. You know, cognitive behavior therapy, all these sort of things are about how do we change human behavior. And I just don't think we've had anywhere near enough focus on this within the R&D sector, and certainly within the agriculture sector. And so ethnography really is understanding the worlds that we're in. This is a quote by Christian Nadsberg. And understanding the worlds we're in, so getting rid of this assumption that humans have the ability to introspect, you know, to figure out what they really want and need, you know, and instead observe the background practices, not the foreground practices, to understand people. And that's, again, that's sort of a good summary of some of the frustration we heard from you guys when we went through this process. You kept telling us, you know, the growers said they wanted this, but then when we delivered it to them, they didn't use it. And we heard that so many times. And that's because, you know, and I heard a speaker once say, you ask people what do they want, but what we've got to try and work out is what do they really want? And they'll never tell you what they really want, because they're embarrassed or they're ashamed, or that they actually maybe don't even know. And what I guess ethnography and behavior modification sort of theory tells us is that people probably most of the time don't really know what they want. They don't have that ability to introspectively really look inside and say, what I really want is I just want to be able to sleep well at night. You know, I just want to have just not one thing else that I don't have to worry about. You know, I talked to a friend of mine who's a great extension officer, been in extension for 30 years. He said to me, very rarely have I seen a farmer that what they really want is to make a lot of money. Occasionally you'll get them, but by and large, that's not their number one priority. What they want is they just want less hassle. They just want more certainty. They just want sort of, you know, continual understanding of practices. And I think it's that understanding that we've really got to focus in on. And so what we've done in this process is we've taken some ideas from a lot of different themes. So this is really the design thinking sort of process, which is, you know, really build empathy with the humans that we're trying to influence, with the humans we're trying to innovate for. You know, and then we help, after we've got empathy, we help to define that, and we ideate that with what we think the problem is or what we think the solution is. Then we prototype that and we test that. So that's the fundamental principle of design thinking. I mean, it's generally deeper than that, but ultimately that's design thinking. But and this is a great picture, because Gardner, what they did is they actually looked at how do we combine our understanding of design thinking with I guess what is now the preeminent process used to commercialize and to develop new products and new companies, particularly startups, is the lean startup methodology. And then this agile, which, you know, we get out of software design and engineering, this process of how do we actually run design sprints and how do we create products fast, how do we learn fast, how do we fail fast. And so what I guess we've tried to do in our process is combine some of these different theories. So the design thinking, which is really about, and the front end of lean startup is really just a ripoff of design thinking. But this whole front end of the process, which I don't actually think we do very well at all in the whole R&D sector, certainly including agriculture, is really going through this problem-solving phase of what is the problem? What's the technical problem? What's the human problem? What's the functional problem? What's the social problem? What's the emotional problem? And not until we actually have that fundamental understanding of the problem can we then go forward and then start building a solution. And ultimately, the process we've designed is what we've designed this process about. And you might think it's a bit unusual having a slide around P, positive parenting program, but in some ways, this is probably one of the best examples I've ever seen of effectively a technological innovation being translated and transformed into an intervention that has had a profound influence all around the world. Now, if I had time, I'd talk to you about P, because it was the most successful parenting program ever commercialized in the world, developed by Professor Matt Sanders at the University of Queensland, commercialized by a startup called P International. And this has been This is available in 20 countries all around the world. It's been, in fact, more than that. I think 40 or 50 countries, been translated into 15 or 20 different languages. You know, governments, the governments in the UK and the US actually, you know, have this program mandated in their legislation, because what they've found is that the Triple P parenting program can actually reduce, and there was a big study in a number of US states where they found that the intervention of Triple P positive parenting program in some of their states had a marked and significant reduction in child abuse presentations at hospitals. You know, so this, and there is no doubt around the world, this is the most studied parenting program in the world. What I thought was interesting is that one of the guys who was involved in getting Triple P off the ground started a company. Initially it was called Behavior Innovation, they're now called Evident. And they started to take the fundamental behavior modification principles that are embedded within Triple P, because Triple P really, the content is parenting, how do you become a good parent? But the process is actually behavior modification. And they actually tried to take those processes into the cane industry, and they ran a project called Cane Changes, where they were trying to work with the cane industry to try and work out how do they, you know, reduce runoff, and got some really good insights. And so in some senses, what I think this shows us is that if you have an intervention, you've got to find a way to get that behavior modification. That's the goal of what innovation is. It's about changing human behavior. And I think until we start spending more time and more money thinking about ethnography, and those slides, some of those slides I've actually picked up from a lady, Shay Quabber. Shay is an awesome lady. She's in Brisbane. She's the design anthropologist for Suncorp Bank. Now, I don't know how many of you as RDCs have design anthropologists working for you, but when I'm listening to Shay, she says that design anthropology around the world is exploding, and most of the design anthropologists, when she goes to conferences, most of them work for one of 5 companies, you know, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. These guys are that big, Apple. Those companies are that big because they've invested enormous amounts of money in understanding human behavior. And you guys know this, you know, you see your kids sort of unable to put their thing down. That's not because it's just really fun. It's because they're absolutely consumed with this thing that's designed to give them exactly what they want.
How's that?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jack. And so this top corner here is this sort of model, which is how we think about it from a business development, from a startup point of view, which is start with a problem. So the bottom right-hand corner is problem, solution, fit. So once we have the problem and we understand all the elements, so we would call it developing deep empathy with the problem. That's the ethnographic end, that's the technological end, the financial end. Once we understand that problem, then we look at trying to build a solution. And that solution is going to be very multidisciplinary. It's not a widget. It's not just an app. You know, it's going to be a very detailed sort of like thinking about a solution. Then we test that. And we use an MVP, minimum viable products, or wireframes, websites, surveys, interviews, discussions, trying to work out, well, who is actually the customer for that? Who actually really has that problem? Who's our early adopter? Who are our innovators? Because we know that the early majority, you know, don't do anything until they've seen those 12 to 18, 17% innovators and early adopters do something. And so we think, who's the innovator? Who's the early adopter that we can work with? And what is that? It makes sure that we're solving a problem that they care about, because they're the ones that are going to take the risk. They're the ones that are going to put the investment in. And once we have that, then we start to understand product market fit. And yeah, that's what I said before, is that when you have, this is so important, when you have product market fit, you know it. Everyone knows it. You guys have all had a project where you just crushed it. You know, you got to the end of the project and grower said, heck, why didn't you do this 2 years ago? You know, when are we going to get the outcomes? You know, people are, and in Andreessen Horowitz, who's one of the leading thinkers in entrepreneurship and innovation, says, you know, you've got product market fit when the dogs are eating the dog food. You know, when you actually get something that's out there that they just can't get enough of. You know you've got product market fit when you've got people lining up to experiment, or people lining up to take a risk, people lining up to try your idea. And so in some senses, we actually don't go to the next stage until we've actually got some evidence that people really care about this idea. People really care about this solution that we've got. And if they don't, and we've got no evidence of that, well, we don't keep going, we stop. But when we do, so the job's not done there. When we do, then we have to go and we have to build a sustainable and scalable business model. And again, this is something that actually no one's actually thinking about, which is, okay, I've got all these sensors and the growers love them and it really works and they say they really want one, but how are they going to deliver them? You know, who is there going to be, are we going to use the agronomist, the local agronomist? Are we going to have to create a new company? And that company, do they sell the sensors and the whole package for $50,000? And then the growers have got to spend time on Sunday night downloading the data from the app and then working out what things, or do we actually have the whole thing managed in the cloud? And then they just get an email on Monday morning saying, spray this chemical in this field at this time because you've got a weed emergency coming. That's a business model question. And that's part of the solution. And so this stage one, next slide, Jack, is really looking at this step one, which is the problem, understanding the problem. This is really that design thinking. It's really this ethnography, understanding the problem. Next slide, Jack. And then we start thinking about the solution. Once we know the problem, in this first stage, it involves talking to hundreds of humans. Okay, it's about trying to identify the growers, the ecosystem partners, the distributors, the agronomists, you know, the funding bodies, the venture capital people, if we think we need a new company, you know, whoever it is. And so that's this design thinking sort of phase. And that would be something that you would do, you know, even potentially before you get into funding the project. You could do that with the researchers and industry all together. Identify the solution. So then you create this multidisciplinary team of, you know, of technological people, scientists, behavioral, you know, economists, maybe the design anthropologists, maybe the marketing people, maybe some finance guys. Actually designing this multidisciplinary team to work out, well, okay, if this is really worth doing, if this problem is so compelling and growers are telling us and everyone's telling us, gosh, yes, we understand the problem, we really need a solution. Well, this is going to cost us $1 million or $5 million. Now let's start building it. And that's when we start building the team. We've really got to make sure we have the execution team, which what Jack talked about, is baking in execution at the front end. Because if you've got no idea how to execute at the start of the project, there's no point doing the project, no point creating a new chemical. And I get this with academics all the time at UQ who are, you know, doing work on spider venom research, and they're trying to find these new chemistries that are going to, you know, be great pesticides, but they've actually not got anyone engaged in the process. So they spend 5 or 10 years, you know, extracting venom from spiders and snakes and coming up with great biology. But the biology and the target's got to be converted to chemistry, and that process has got to then create it. And so often they come up with, they present it to industry and industry says, but we've already got something that does that. Yeah, sure, it's a bit more potent. Maybe it works a bit faster, but that particular insect class is already managed, you know? And so ultimately it's about making sure we have this whole team holistic approach. And that process, I think there was a question there about how many people do we talk to? As a general rule, what we say is to really understand a problem, you've got to talk to at least 100 people. And 100 isn't some arbitrary number. It's been determined through a lot of extensive research and exploration, because we really need to talk to at least 5 different groups. So you might have a group of producers. If you're in the almond industry, you want to talk to at least 20 almond farmers, and particularly maybe in a fairly tight group, you might talk to 2 groups of 20, maybe one which is corporate almond farmers and one which is small family almond farmers. And 20 is a really important number, because once you talk to about 20, you actually stop hearing new things. You start hearing the same thing over and over again. And this process of ethnography and design thinking is about looking for patterns. It's what the psychologist does when the couple walks into the room, looking for patterns, looking for evidence, looking for consistent themes. And that's what we as humans are actually really good at doing. And so that's really important part of this first stage. This is really this design thinking part of the process. And step 3 really is about building the execution team. So making sure you've actually got an idea about how we're going to take this out to market. And until we get to that stage 1, 2, and 3, complete, signed off, everyone's happy. Yeah, I think we know the problem, we know the solution, we know who's going to execute. We don't go to the next stage. But the next stage is really about validation. So this is really where the lean startup methodology comes in. So we start thinking about, well, how do we actually prove that we got the right problem? How do we turn that problem into a market? And how do we turn that solution into a product or a service? You know, is it an app that they have on their phone? Is it a service where we train the agronomists to come and visit the farm because they don't trust an app, but they will trust their agronomist? So do we give the app to the agronomist? Do we do away with an app altogether And do we actually just have this as an instant service basis where it's just a consulting business model? So this is where we think about what does the solution have to look like to become a product or a service? And then we start testing that. We might do a small trial and actually, with instead of doing the demo farm where we actually pay, all this money to have sensors or have these other technologies, we actually have a small working prototype of our business model. We get an agronomist to deliver the service. We actually get a simple version of an app. And Jack does a lot of work with some of my MBA students of helping people just build very simple, app wireframes just to test whether anyone really cares, whether it actually solves a problem. And so we're constantly in this stage 2, building using MVPs to validate our assumptions around the problem and around the solution, trying to turn problem solution into product market fit. And we will know we've got product market fit when customers keep lining up and over a beer on a Friday afternoon, the farmer says, I'm in this project and my goodness, it's just, you wouldn't believe how much of a difference it's made in terms of water use efficiency. They say it, over lunch on a Sunday, I've cut my water by 20%. Or I've just had so much better quality this year because I've had, better pest control. And someone says, well, how did you do that? And say, well, I'm using this new fangled thing, doing this trial with CSIRO, or doing this trial with HIA or with University of Western Sydney. And at the same time, we're building the business model, which is step 6. So, which is really, it's a 9-step process. The business model, if you don't know about it, and I know MLA particularly use this pretty fundamentally, and I think HIA do a little bit as well. This is the architecture we use to describe our ideas, to actually describe the business model, and recognizing that it's all a prototype, it's all a guess, it's all hypotheses. And so the process of stage 2 is to take our understanding, our empathy with the problem, our understanding of what the solution looks like, recognizing that both problem and solution will probably change as we actually get it closer to market. A famous quote from Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali, I forget, everyone has a plan until I get punched in the face. So this is about recognizing that once we start going out and start executing, we might have a great plan. We might think we know what the problem, what the solution is. And this comes back to that question of, we finish the project and then we throw it over the fence. It doesn't work. Well, we don't want to ever get in that situation. We want to know that it works because we failed dozens and dozens and dozens of times during the development. And then at the end of that part, we get to this execution phase. And so we've got our team, we've got our execution team. We've actually got product market fit, some evidence of product market fit. We've got a pretty good idea what our business model is. And then we push the go button to actually start building, to actually start launching. But we've already had prototypes and minimum viable products in the market in a very sort of iterative sense for the whole life of the project. So, again, I said yesterday about an example I had with both HIA and MLA. We're both looking at funding a researcher at UQ for 3D printing of meat, 3D printing of fruits and vegetables. And the HIA brought me into the project and I said, well, what if people don't want 3D printed fruit? Who's the customer for 3D printed fruit? The researcher said, oh, that's easy. It's kids. We've done all this research and kids would really love to have 3D printed strawberries. I said, really? How do you know that? Have you ever given a kid a 3D printed strawberry? Who's going to pay for 3D printed strawberries for kids? How much is that going to cost? Are we talking $5 a strawberry? And how long is it going to last? Is it shelf stable? Do you package it? There's all these questions that no one ever thought of. And they said, well, if it's a good idea, then that'll all get worked out later. And I think to their credit, both HIA and MLA said, well, actually, no, we're not going to fund that unless we actually know that this is solving the problem we really care about. And that's the beauty of having this design thinking, this lean methodology in your processes is you as RDC managers are asking those questions. How do I know that this is going to be used if I give you all this money to build it? Don't build something you don't know it's going to be used. And so this last part is really about recognizing, well, what's the best mechanism, and then just doing the execution. But you have a stage gate at the end of stage 1, at the end of stage 2, because you might say, actually, look, yes, we know there's a problem and we know this solution solves the problem, but consistently in the business model, there's 3 parts to the business model, and we don't go through that in detail here, but it's fairly well established. The right-hand side of the canvas is about desirability. So who's the customer, what's the problem, and what's the solution? Is there a compelling demand or need for it? The left-hand side of the canvas really talks about feasibility. Can we do it? It's like hydrogen technology 20 years ago. lots of desirability, but it was going to cost, hundreds of millions of dollars. So it wasn't feasible. Or, you didn't have the mechanism, the network. And then the bottom half of it is really about viability. And that's really getting all three of those sections takes you to the very top of the IRL, the investment readiness level. You don't have IRL 9 until you've got a fully validated business model canvas. You've established desirability, you've established feasibility, and you've established viability down the bottom. And until you've actually got that, you don't execute. And ultimately, it's the discipline around that which is absolutely missing. Because we just get and sometimes I don't even think we get the desirability. We think we've got desirability, but we don't. And so it's actually making sure we actually have evidence of desirability. And then the feasibility and the viability, obviously comes down to business model innovation and thinking about how do we deliver this. And so what we're I guess presenting in this process, in this report, is a method. And it's not, you don't necessarily need all of this, but we think that some of integrating some of these steps into your systems of deciding what projects you're going to fund, of using some of these early steps 1, 2, into talking to industry about, well, what is the problem? How do we actually work out what the problem is? Okay, you keep telling me that yield's a problem. Okay, it's been the problem all along, but everything we've done to help grow yield hasn't worked. So what is the problem? Maybe we can't do it. Maybe we're at peak yield. Or maybe there's a behavioral problem that's actually stopping us from getting yield, because one particular grower seems to have more yield than everyone else. And so it's really about thinking about, these are all individual tools. It's quite a complex set of tools to pull this off. And I guess what we're saying is, look, this is not just throw everything you're doing out and just use this. There's elements of this that needs to be embedded into all of your processes. And we need to work out how do we embed some of these systems into your internal processes. How do we get some of this thinking into industry? And how do we actually try and get some critical mass of expertise across these areas that is all well established in psychology and the startup entrepreneurship ecosystem? How do we get some of these elements into the RDC ecosystem to try and improve impact? And I guess that's what Jack and Andy and I are really passionate about, trying to work out how do we help you guys do that.